Hello, fifth grade. We are going to continue reading Jim Ugly. We are ready for chapter 10, Bared Fangs. The rain came tumbling in, catching some men in the street and pouring like molten silver off their hats. I cast a glance for Jim Ugly. He'd probably sheltered himself somewhere. I kept to the covered boardwalk. When I turned the corner, there was Jim Ugly, way up the street. The rice powder was running off his fur like whitewash. Confounded mutt. Any dog would have had the sense enough to climb under something, but the wolf and Jim Ugly wouldn't step out of the way of a downpour of rain. I hurried closer, keeping to the covered walk. I was about to call out when I felt myself lifted off my feet. Someone had me by the back of the collar. "You know that dog, don't you?" I knew the Yellowleg's voice. My hair stiffened. He swung me about as if I were hanging in a noose. I found myself looking into his eyes, deep and black as caves. "He your dog?" "No, sir," I said. That was close enough to the truth, for Jim Ugly still felt like Dad's dog. "You were about to call to him." "He appeared to be drowning," I answered, having to gasp for breath. "That's Sam Bannock's dog, isn't it?" the Yellowleg muttered. He was leaning one arm on a pine stick with the bark still on it. "What's it doing in Truckee?" "You're choking me," I cried out. "Mean to," he breathed, and he held me a little tighter. "Sam tell you to bring the dog?" "Sam Bannock's in his grave." "Unless he jumped right back out of it. The actress lady's here, and there stands his dog. It's a regular reunion. I believe I'd better keep an eye on both. Sam Bannock's likely to show up big as life. But I can't let you run off and warn him, can I?" For all I knew, he intended to wring my neck on the spot, but I didn't wait to find out. I kicked the pine branch out from under his arm, but he caught it. His weight shifted to his sore foot, and I could see his face tighten up with pain. Then he raised the stick in a fury to quilt me with it, and that was a mistake. I didn't even see Jim Ugly start. Suddenly, he was there under our feet with his fangs bared and death in his throat. The Yellowleg dropped me and tried to fend off those lunging white teeth with the pine branch. There was an awful commotion, and I knew that Jim Ugly could bring him down. But then I came to my senses. If folks took Jim Ugly to be a man-killer, they'd shoot him on the spot. I saw him about to lunge again, and I stepped in front and tried to wave him off. No, back off, stop!" Jim Ugly grazed past my leg, and I jumped on him. I wrapped my arms around his hindquarters and held tight. His blood was up, and I thought he'd turn on me in a flash, but he didn't. I got him calmed down, and when I looked up, the Yellowleg was gone. I was close to tears. It was sheer fright, mostly, but it was also that Jim Ugly wasn't going to let a man take a stick to me. I never guessed he'd do that. I never guessed that he cared about me. In chapter 11, I become an actor. We were both soaking wet when I got Jim Ugly over to the theater. The door was now locked, so we sat under the wooden awning and watched the rain. "I'm obliged to you," I muttered. He gave me one look with his sharply slanting wolf eyes, as if to say I was kind of pesky to have around, but he was getting used to me. Then he returned to his own thoughts. I'd like to have held out my hand to see if he would nuzzle it, but I was afraid that he wouldn't, so I didn't. After a moment, he moved off to be by himself and curled up with his tongue hanging out. I decided to give the Arizona girl back her 75 cents. For all I knew, the Yellowleg had put Jim Ugly on his bounty list and was oiling up his Colt revolver. We'd better get out of town any way we could. There was bound to be a freight wagon leaving Truckee for somewhere. Maybe I could go along. It had hardly stopped raining when a black buggy came along, glistening like a beetle, and out stepped William Tell and Miss Jenny. When she saw Jim Ugly, her eyebrows rose in the air. "Look at that poor dog. He's soaked to the hide." So was I, but she didn't seem to notice that. "He's all right," I said, and dug out the coins. "Here's the 75 cents back. I can't be in your play tonight." "Can't?" Her hand went to her heart as if to stanch a moral wound. "But you must. Who will I get to play the role?" I don't know, miss. At this desperate hour, we'll have to cancel the performance. I'm sorry, I said. There's someone with a Colt revolver apt to shoot my dog on sight. If he doesn't get taken by pneumonia first, come inside. William Tell had fished a key out to the door. Miss Jenny led us down the aisle to the rear. Like a magician, she plucked her little dog from her coat and handed it to William Tell. She found a handful of rags, flung off her coat and hat, and went to work. She rubbed down Jim Ugly's fur as if she were polishing brass. Why would anyone want to shoot this glorious beast? He looks part wolf. He is, I replied softly. That was enough to worry most folks, but it didn't seem to bother her. Anyone with a Colt in his hand will have to deal with me. William Tell spread a long arm as if an introduction. The Arizona markswoman, rascals and ruffians beware. She spared me a glance. Of course you'll be in the performance tonight, she declared firmly. You are an actor now. Frederick, the boy looks half drowned. Find him something dry to put on and rehearse him in his part. Frederick turned out to be William Tell and the Arizona girl's husband. She said they'd keep Jim Ugly in the dressing room, and I agreed to keep the 75 cents. The only clothes that fit me were the knee breeches, white stockings, and blue jacket that William Tell's son wore in the play. So I wore them, while my own clothes hung up to dry near the pot-bellied stove. Frederick showed me where one of the actors, playing a soldier, would grab me by the arm and lead me on stage. Once I had the apple balanced on my head, I was to say, Father, Father, I fear not. Let the arrow find its mark. When the night fell, the theater was lit, and William Tell himself went out front to sell tickets. The rain had stopped, but the roads were mud. Miss Jenny introduced me to the other actors, who began making up their faces and remarked grimly that we would be playing to an empty house tonight, so don't be nervous. I didn't feel nervous at all. I wasn't a real actor like the rest of them, like my dad. I'd be hardly more than a piece of furniture standing with an apple on my head. And anyone could shout, Father, Father, I fear not. Let the arrow find its mark. It barely needed practicing. Jim Ugly had curled up near the stove, hardly paying attention to the goings-on, as if that was the way Dad trained him. He just about ignored the little dog Pie-Face and kept dozing off. Mrs. William Tell, in a starchy white bonnet and petticoats a foot thick, stood at the peephole in the front curtain. She was squinting as if looking through a spyglass. We'll hold the curtain 10 minutes, she said, clutching her snub-nosed dog. I wondered if she carried it on stage with her. Muddy roads are bound to slow some folks down, but here they come. And then she turned to me with a confident smile. You won't let me down, will you? Ellis of the Skunks has retired from an acting career, his mother tells me. Would you like to travel with us? She didn't wait for me to answer. Of course you would. She hurried off before I could open my mouth. After a moment, I stood on my toes and put my eye to the peephole. Families came sauntering down the aisle and slipped off to chairs and benches. I saw kids waving or calling out to each other. I saw Wilhelmina and Mr. Cornelius taking their places in a plush box along the left side of the theater. There were other boxes, empty boxes, dark boxes, and I couldn't help imagining my dad slipping into one of them to watch the show. What a surprise he'd get seeing me up on the stage, play acting, like him. Me? I had hated seeing him rush off to the theater. Plays seemed always to sprout wings, for they carried him off to other towns and cities, and he dropped me off in one boarding school or another. Still, he always came back for me. Frederick came rushing backstage with the money box, and in no time at all transformed himself into William Tell with a flowing red beard. One of the Austrian soldiers in helmets, whose name was Abner, had his hands on a rope to lift the curtain as soon as he got the signal. I took a last look through the peephole. A man in muddy boots came heavily down the aisle and fell into a seat. He stretched a sore foot in the aisle, and the yellow stripe of his pant leg was sharp as the sunlight. "Curtain!" called out Mrs. William Tell.